Hi everyone, I'm Dylan. I'm going to talk about principled arguments. I'm going to talk about principled arguments specifically in actor motions in light of the new rules that have been added for Sophia Worlds, which clarify, codify, and slightly alter how actor motions are governed in general, and in specific their relationship to principled arguments within them, because I think there is a wealth of opportunity for creative, innovative, and interesting ways you can make these arguments. A lot of new ground to explore, and indeed old ground that is as of yet still unexplored. And it is my hearty recommendation to teams to be prepared for principled arguments and actor motions because I think they are effective and they're strategic. And I think they're a little bit, sometimes in my experience, um, they're not opted for perhaps as often as they should be. And so this should be an arrow in your quiver coming into a major, particularly now that you can feel hopefully empowered by the new manual to be a little bit more confident in how your principle will be received in an actor motion, given that it's less up to the interpretation of judges as it was to an extent before. For what it's worth, it's largely my view that the majority of aspects of actor motions have not changed significantly. It's mostly just been a clarification of existing norms, or at least some existing circuit norms and practices, into specific verbiage. Although, with that being said, I have two caveats. One is, in line with what I just said there, I didn't write the update. I'm not a member of the Sophia Worlds C18. I'm not a DCA. I'm not involved with it. Um, I've just, like you, I hope, read the manual update, read the new manual, um, and have my understanding of what those passages mean. I recommend heartily that you read it yourself, the whole manual, to be fair, because it's very well written. There will be things in there you did not know were in there. There will be things that are not there that you thought were there, particularly if you haven't read it in a while. And it also suggests that if you are going to read it with a kind of open mind and try not to read through it your expectations of it. Just read what it says, see what it says, and go with that. Both as a judge, because that's your obligation to kind of abide by in adjudication, but also as a speaker to know the rules you're governed by in the activity. Second thing is I had written a much more convoluted version of these slides. I recorded it. I didn't like it. I didn't like it because I went far too detailed on small intricacies, nuances, and complexities that were not actually helpful. Because I think what actually is going to be helpful for teams, particularly for this upcoming major, but just in general, is knowing where they can put their attention and focus when making principled arguments in actor motions, and specifically how the rules govern them, things they should be keeping an eye out for, things they should be thinking about when they're making these arguments, but how they choose specifically to fill those kind of vacuums of analysis, or those kinds of areas for explanation, I want to leave up to them. I've no interest in kind of setting the agenda for how actor motions are debated, or in specific how principled arguments are presented in actor motions. I just want to kind of hopefully make it clearer what you can do in terms of principled arguments in these debates. So with that in mind, here's a slight overview of the manual changes. They're as follows. If it's unclear, firstly, what the actor is, OG can define it, particularly relevant for principled arguments insofar as if the actor is the USA, the US government and the US people might hold different values from one another, or they might hold those values or principles at different relative intensities than one another. And so having some clarity on who the specific actor is, or which subgroup of actors has been picked out to be the actor in a kind of umbrella actor situation can be quite important. The second thing is that actors are not universally presumed to be selfish utility maximizers. Perhaps some actors are, but it requires analysis to explain what the value system of an actor is. Thirdly, actors can hold my descriptive and normative beliefs, which are relatively rigid or relatively intense, which is to say, they've got beliefs about how the world is and how the world ought to be, some of which are very strong, some of which are more open to interpretation, or more open to persuasion. And notably, just very briefly, those two things are distinct as well, because I have a very rigid belief that the table my laptop is sat on right now is made out of wood. It would be very difficult to disabuse me of that notion. However, it's not an action guiding belief in my day-to-day life. Although, on the other hand, I probably believe quite earnestly in the idea of honesty, and honesty might be something that's very important to me in my day-to-day actions. But what honesty constitutes, what it means to be honest, is something that I'm open to argumentation and persuasion on. I might change my mind on what that means. So the strength of a belief, a normative belief of an actor, a principle of an actor, does not it can take numerous different forms, and which aspect of strength you're talking about kind of something that's interesting land to till when you're giving these kinds of arguments. Fourth thing, when information new to the actor enters the debate, the actor becomes aware of it. This is true for fact claims. I think it is to an extent true for just argumentation in general as well. You know, if you explain that honesty is a very important thing to an actor who doesn't hate the idea of honesty, they might become persuaded to be more honest. Fifthly, actors are presumed to be acting free from biased cognition, undue influence, or external pressure. They're able to follow a logically coherent argument and will not defer back to beliefs that they might have pressure on them to believe, which is part of the reason why an actor may, in an actor motion, be persuaded to take an action that they'd be very unlikely to take in real life, because you know, kind of vacuum here. And again, it is clarified in this manual, as in previous manuals, to be fair. Actor motions are indeed not predictive evaluations of what an actor will do, but it's what they should do relative to their interests, both moral and otherwise. And so, if you prefer, it's worth thinking about these motions as partially that the actor is kind of in the room with you listening to the debate. Partially, you can think of it like you're giving advice to your friend at the pub, because they're not sure whether to, I don't know, text their ex or something like that. And the kinds of things you'd say to them there are not dissimilar from the kinds of things you'd say in the debate. A combination of right and wrong, their interests, both moral and otherwise, and just what's good for them and their kind of happiness and their kind of hedonistic aspect of their life. So there's a plurality of things that are important to an actor in a given actor debate. Okay, how do you make a principle in these debates? First way to do it, easiest way to do it, most common way to do it, very effective way to do it, is this actor holds this principle. So if the motion is, this house as a priest would murder their neighbor, it'd be very easy for an opposition team to say a priest, if it's say a Catholic priest, presumably, that's the presumption I'm making, murdering your neighbor against, the one of the commandments, one of the first ones, one of the big ones. Not one of the first two, but after that. Actually, it's against more than one commandment. But that's neither here nor there. This is a belief they likely hold very, very strongly. We can just explain why they likely hold this value very, very strongly. They really, really don't like killing people. And then on your side of the motion, we better respect this principle. And that can be understood quite generally, right? It can be we maximize a value the actor cares about. It's we abide by or don't break a moral law that the actor cares about. It could be that we respect a virtue or don't give into a vice that the actor cares about. There's a lot of different ways in which you can uphold a principle better on your side of the house. And you should be kind of open to different ways in which you can talk about it. A couple of different additional burdens there you might want to cover. I'm going to leave these out from future examples or future methods, but note that they're equally true for those as well. This actor cares more about this principle than their self-interest. You can run the numbers on it in the debate that you're in. They might care about it equal to their self-interest, but they violate this principle far more than they lose some aspect of their self-interest, right? alongside that, this principle is stronger than other relevant principles. So maybe that neighbor is, I don't know, is selling grain at an unfair price, and that might be something they care about. They care about fairness, but the extent to which that, them killing the person would prevent them from selling their grain at an unfair price, it's probably not as significant as murdering them. And similarly, one thing you might want to think about here is that not all principles allow their ends to be justified by their means, right? So, for example, they may care about fairness, but one specific means through which they cannot attain fairness is murder. So that's a very straightforward way in which you can run a principle. This actor holds this principal value, this specific principal value, and this specific principal value is violated by their side of the motion, or is upheld or respected in some way on our side of the motion. This kind of argument is best for actors with well-defined, specific moral beliefs or codes. So the easiest actors for which you can argue that they hold the specific beliefs that you need them to for this principle to work. Although you're, of course, welcome to use this in other debates or other kinds of actor motions, where you might need to do a little bit more legwork to prove the actor holds that value. Second is that the actor holds beliefs or intuitions which support this principle. So maybe they don't specifically, or you're not sure whether they specifically care about this thing, but they hold other values that pretty arguably or easily arguably align with or support this specific principle. So if the motion was, this House as the USA supports the right to be forgotten, and the right to be forgotten is some aspect of like GDPR law about being able to get rid of old stuff about you on the internet, basically. I don't know, like maybe people in the USA do believe in this, maybe they don't. It's not clear. It'd be tough to argue they specifically care about this, right? But you can say the USA cares deeply, if you define it as, say, people of the USA, they care deeply about individual freedom. And here's 3 reasons why they care about individual freedom. We can see it culturally, politically, economically, maybe religiously, maybe in this way, right? And here's why the right to be forgotten is an important aspect or important instantiation of individual freedom. Here's why the right to be forgotten is a kind of freedom that we think is on the same level as the right to free speech, or is an aspect of the right to free speech. This is, and then you explain that that's better respected on your side. Here, the motion just gives it to you that's better on your side. But if it was a specific policy and you wanted to argue through the lens of the right to be forgotten, if it was, this as the USA would adopt, European style GDPR laws, right? You could argue about it on the lines of the right to be forgotten, and then you have to explain how that right to be forgotten is better supported by your policy. This is a very, very fun kind of argument to run. You've got a nice blend of objective analytical work as well as subjective or intersubjective deductive work on the actor. Very, very strong arguments as well, because it's very, very difficult to target any one individual part of it, right? I think it'd be quite difficult for a team to respond to this argument if it's made very, very well. These are best for motions where the actor might not have a preformed principled belief about the particular motion at hand or the particular principle that you want to argue for, but they have defined values or intuitions otherwise. You can see here, by the way, why you might base this off of intuitions instead of beliefs either. You might want to suggest that the intuitions we have about our own childhood and the enjoyment we had in the freedom we were afforded to play without supervision or to skip school once or twice means that as a parent, we should not micromanage our child's life if that was a motion we had to do, right? And that would be based off intuitions, probably more than values, because it's based off of just different parts of the actor's kind of moral network, moral web. So you would argue from that basis. And as was the case before, You might want to argue here that there are no other stronger principles that this contradicts, and that kind of thing, just to kind of shore up your bases when you're making these arguments. Third thing is just this principle is true. I have an asterisk here because this is one you need to be careful for. I'll run through the example first. If it's this house would take care of their parents in their old age, or this house as an individual would take care of their parents in their old age, you might want to make an argument that you owe, an obligation of reciprocity for your parents. They cared for you in X, Y, Z ways. We believe the reciprocity is important for ABC reasons. And it's best respected on our side of the debate. Now, the reason why I have the asterisk on this is that explaining that a principle is true is not in and of itself sufficient 99% of the time for that principle to be a compelling piece of argumentation in an actor debate. The reason for that is because you're not starting from the same set of moral intuitions as the ordinary intelligent voter in a lot of actor debates. And indeed, you're not starting from the same balance of altruism that you are in a policy debate or an analysis motion, because instead of just caring about the well-being of the world or the kind of moral state of the world, you care about the actor's interests as they relate to the world, and that actor's interests can be moral in nature. However, that's not to say that the fact of a principle being true is irrelevant for these debates, and it can be important in a couple of ways. One is for weighing actor debates. So if you have the objective state of self-interestedness being relatively similar, maybe being slightly won by one side in an actor motion, a principled argument can oftentimes be a way of swinging the balance of those things, which is to say, weighing them off. So maybe in this debate here, the PM says you take care of your parents in their old age because that will help you get closure when they pass, and you'll have our ability to say goodbye and be able to share some good moments for them, and it will be an emotionally cathartic experience. And the leader of opposition says it will cause you to take time out of your career, often can bring up old memories that are unpleasant, or can bring up old hostilities and conflicts that should be better left lie. At that stage of the debate, at that level of analysis, the judge isn't really probably sure which side is winning or not. But if you were to insert in the DPM speech, you kind of owe an obligation to do it as well. Well, that can swing the balance. And that's true for many people's decisions in their day-to-day lives. I could go to this party or I could go to this party. I'm not sure which one's going to be more fun for me, but this person is an old friend of mine and they came to my party, and so I should probably go to theirs. That would be a nice thing to do for them. Or maybe this person's party, maybe they're going through a tougher time right now and they could really do it having their friends there, whereas that other person is doing fine and they don't need me there as much. As a consequence of that, you can weigh up the decision on a kind of moral basis, even without necessarily saying that this principle overrides your personal considerations entirely. Second instance it's good for is for non-specific actor motions. And in particular, non-specific actor motions where you're basing your arguments on moral intuitions. So say in this debate, you had, say you have the kind of opposite of the previous example. PM says, you likely care about your parents being cared for in their old age because you feel you have an obligation with them. And LO says, you don't think that because you care about your own personal life and your own personal career. And indeed, it wasn't your choice to be brought into this world. So why should you take care of them when they're older? That's an instance where, we don't have a good reason principally to care about either side over the other yet, really. And so the DPM speech, you could say, well, here's why our principle is simply more true. The obligation that someone has for reparations is simply stronger than the obligations they have to their own self in their life. If an actor is not entirely clear which of those two things they cared about more, most people would be open to persuasion that the one that is simply the more powerful moral belief or more powerful moral statement is the one that should be followed. This might not and is unlikely to, as per the new rules, to persuade someone who deeply does not care about this value that that value is now true. If someone is a perennial liar, they love lying, they don't see anything wrong with lying, they lie all the time, whether or not they get away with it, because they don't feel like they have any particular obligation towards the truth. Simply explaining to them that they're wrong is unlikely to shift the needle massively in their moral considerations. You might be able to shift their mind a little bit if you can attach it to specific values they otherwise have, and that might explain to them why this one value they shouldn't hold as much because it doesn't align with their other values. But again, it's not an instance where this is going to be particularly effective. It's going to be far more effective when it's about something that otherwise the actor is not sure how much they care about it, but they care about it in some general way. Explain that it is simply a powerful obligation is a compelling piece of persuasion for many people, especially if you're basing your argument off of broad moral intuitions, as you often are for a principled argument in general, right? You're basing it off of widely shared moral intuitions. We have this intuition X, this intuition Y, this intuition Z, and that implies principle A. And this actor is no stranger to those three intuitions, given that they come from the general population and we don't know anything really about them. And so they are likely to be open to persuasion that this principle is certainly true. Third group that it's particularly relevant for is rational benevolent actors. So if you have an actor where you can say, I can't think of one specific off the top of my head right now, but if it was like an actor that has demonstrated in the past to be willing to change their beliefs when met with new evidence, that cares a lot about doing what's best for the world, they're open on a plurality of ways in which they can benefit the world, you're very likely to be able to say, look, this actor cares more than anything else, about what is truly, truly best for the world. Let's explain what's truly, truly best for the world. Maybe this house, as a good philosophy professor, would not would fail a student who didn't submit an exam on time, even though they know they have a difficult home life, right? If that was a motion, then maybe what a team could argue for there is this is an actor that has a specific relationship with the truth and what is rationally good. And so let's just explain what's rationally good. Because as stressed before in the rule changes, the information you say in the debate, the arguments you make are not irrelevant to the actor. The actor receives them in some kind of way. The information that you've presented, they become aware of. And so they're open to persuasion. You're by proxy persuading them. Now, to be clear, this does not mean you can simply say, our principle is true, and given that everyone should do the thing that is true or everyone likes truth, they should follow our principle. It requires more depth of explanation. It's going to be more rare than just the kind of general case. But all I'm trying to stress here is that the truth of a principle can be important either as an additional component of an actor debate or in some very specific actor debates where the truth is particularly relevant to the actor. Okay, how do you weigh competing principle values? Because often, and I'm kind of touching this a little bit there, you might have two different values that conflict. The actor has two different values that conflict, and you're not sure how to weigh those things up when evaluating what the actor should do relative to their interests. And this is how you would approach this as a speaker who has to solve that problem. So often a second speaker or a first speaker, if you can have a good intuition or expectation of what that clash is going to be. a couple of ways. One is the relative intensity or rigidity of principal values. So it could be either you simply believe more in freedom as this actor than you believe in safety, or you believe equally strongly in freedom and safety, but you're more open to persuasion about safety than you are about freedom. So yeah. Second is the relative truth of the principal values. I stressed this a little bit earlier. It's rare that you'll have an actor who, when evaluating two beliefs they hold strongly, would not care about which one is simply the stronger one, especially if it's not to the extent of saying one of them does not exist or is not a valuable thing, but simply that one is stronger than the other. You know, your obligation to your family is more important to your friend than your friends, or vice versa. Simply explaining why one of those things is more important than the other, many actors will be open to that as a piece of persuasion. Third is relevant inline or tie-breaking obligations. So, for example, if you had a set of kind of value-oriented obligations, right, like freedom and truth, then you also had a set of relationship obligations. So, family, for example. You could argue that the actor cares a lot about freedom and truth. They have to pick one, and it's impossible to know, or it's very difficult to deduce which one they hold stronger, or which one is being more significantly violated or upheld. Therefore, they should take a course of action that helps out their family most in this third way, right? Or that helps out themselves most in that third way. I stole this piece of analysis from Andy Cullinan because I saw him run this as a piece of way in a debate once, and I thought it was really effective. Fourth is logical priority or hierarchy. It is possible to argue that some values or principles derive their benefit from some other value. So perhaps you might say that expression is derives its value from freedom. Expression without freedom isn't really expression, so freedom is more important than expression. Fifthly is freedom from bias and undue influence. I put an asterisk here because it's unclear sometimes, in fact, often, when something is a belief that's held due to bias, or that is a value. And the line between value and bias or value and influence is very, very, very murky. However, in a rare case, it doesn't seem improbable to me that you could argue that you should hold one value stronger than the other, because this actor likely holds one of those values primarily due to bias and undue influence, whereas one of those values is more in line with their kind of true sense of personality or self, that kind of thing. I suspect that the instance where that would be relevant is quite rare, but it's an option that you have. And sixthly, just conventional weighing. If it's about, freedom and safety, we'll go for the same example: freedom and safety. You could simply say this undermines freedom at a greater intensity. This undermines freedom at a greater scale. This undermines freedom for people the actor cares about more, like a kind of inline principle in a way, that they've got obligations to. All those kinds of things, just normal weighing, will still be relevant here because it's not massively dissimilar from just making any other argument. I think the kind of key takeaway from the majority of this workshop is that principled arguments in actor debates are not that dissimilar from principled arguments in non-actor debates, which themselves are not too dissimilar from non-principled arguments in non-actor debates. Most arguments are mostly the same kind of things you're going to be saying, or they have the same kinds of options of saying. And as with most arguments, normal pieces of weighing are going to be effective in these debates. Okay. A couple of final things, just kind of final thoughts and things to watch out for. This is particularly relevant if you're going to be newer to giving these kinds of arguments. If you're somebody who has previously been hesitant to deliver principled arguments in actor motions, but now feel a little bit emboldened by the new manual changes, or just yourself, you feel like trying it out a little bit more, here's some things that you otherwise would have to learn the hard way. So one is, think of reasons why an actor should do the benevolent thing rather than the non-benevolent thing. This is a very, very tricky question. It's kind of the central question in Kierkegaard's Either Or, if you've ever read it. It's notoriously difficult to explain why you should do a benevolent thing instead of a selfish thing in a way that doesn't rely on implicit benevolent reasoning. However, if you don't overcomplicate it too much, and just think of reasons why in your own life you've made benevolent decisions rather than selfish decisions, you'll be able to find reasons why. This situation, firstly, maybe felt like a particularly important one, or had a particularly important moral weight to it, or could just be kind of other inline basic stuff. I felt like I would have regretted it a lot otherwise, or I would have felt intense shame if I hadn't made this decision, or even, oh, well, if I made this decision this one time, it would have been such an important part of my life that it would have maybe affected my decisions going forwards. Some of those things are kind of, you know, sort of benevolent, sort of selfish reasonings, but they should oftentimes be specific enough to get you over the hurdle. Because what you're often trying to accomplish, if you are ever asked that question, is just a good enough reason to do a benevolent thing. If someone says, well, the actor just, they care about benevolence and they care about selfishness, why not just do the selfish thing? Just give a couple of reasons they should be fine. Second thing is, think of responses that insulate your argument against money, or responses to money, or installations of your argument against money. What I mean by that is, if the motion was, this house, as an artist, would sell out, or I don't know, maybe this house as an artist would make a really dishonest work, or take a commission from a really immoral client if they gave them a bunch of money. You may have a suite of exceptionally compelling principled arguments at your disposal that you deploy. And then a team responds by saying, well, on our side, why wouldn't the actor just take that money and, I don't know, donate it to a cause that they care about a lot? Or maybe that, well, if they care about their art, they can have more people see their art in the future when they spend that money on a marketing campaign. Don't turn your nose up at these arguments. They're perfectly valid arguments. But there is ways to respond to it. You need to be prepared for it. I think often the way you're going to do it is by being very particular about how you're making the argument. Rather than saying you care about honesty in this kind of general way, or you care about your art in some general way, it's often going to be, here's some red lines that you will not cross. Here's some rules you will not break. Here's some means you will not deploy to get to an end. And if you can think of instances, again, in your own life or in stories of where an end obviously does not justify the means, even if the ends are desirable, you'll find the ways in which you can insulate your argument to protect against this category of response. Third thing, be prepared for different judging expectations. So I think that hopefully the variety of interpretations that judges have about principled arguments and actor motions should be honed in a little bit by the new manual, because the manual gives a lot more clarity in some areas. However, there will still be a lot of judges expecting different kinds of things from you in actor motions, and specifically as those relate to principled arguments within those motions. Be prepared for that, and don't lock yourself into too rigid or specific an understanding of things because it matches what you believe, especially if you're aware that you've got a kind of arcane reading of something. With that in mind, number 4 is be willing to deploy a mixed strategy. It is, so long as you've got time to do it, almost always going to be in your best interest to say not just one of these strands we talked about here, but this actor cares specifically about this principle. And you can also derive this principle from other strongly held values that the actor has. And indeed, this principle is true. And when push comes to shove, if it competes against other values that they have or other aspects of their life, the fact of it being true should be important to this actor for this reason. Rather than just honing in on one of those things, having a few different ones at your disposal as a kind of a pluralistic version of your principled argument is almost always going to be effective, provided that it's not pushing you up against too much time pressure. Because If a judge thinks that all of those things are valid and reasonable ways of forwarding a principled argument in an act or motion, then you've only enhanced your argument by diversifying it. And if they thought that they were looking for one particular version of that or excluding one of those things, you've covered your bases a little bit more. The fifth thing then finally is just run principles in act or motions. They're very fun to do. They're exceptionally effective a lot of the time. And often I think you'll find yourself being able to make very simple arguments be very, very effective because teams are unprepared to deal with them, or just because a lot of these arguments, although they might take some time to think of, the actual running of them is not exceptionally difficult. You can, if you realize early in the debate that there's an interesting idea to be explored about privacy here, it's not always very difficult to explain why this actor cares about privacy. They care about things related to privacy, that privacy is important, and that this particular course of action that the actor could take would be a violation of privacy in some pretty significant ways. That's oftentimes going to be a really easy way into a debate, and often be very, very effective. So do deploy them, do have them available to you, particularly in the run up to Worlds or any major season. Have them as tools in your arsenal. Practice them, talk about them with your partner before competition, be prepared to deliver them when necessary. They're very fun and they're very effective. Cool. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer. I'll try to keep an eye on comments kind of intermittently to try and pop in and answer a few if I get any. And yeah, I really appreciate it. If you see me at Worlds, say hello. I'll be judging. Bye now.